Hey there, it's Caitlin from Ragamuffin Pet Photography with another 5-minute tutorial on how to photograph your pet at home. The theme this week is night photography. Bit of a tricky one if you don't know what you're doing, but I have 8 top tips on how to improve your night photos with your pet. I also have a little cheat sheet, so if you want to download that so you can actually take it with you next time you're photographing, I'll put a link somewhere below. Enjoy these tips. Tip number 1 is to pick the right lens. I recommend avoiding longer focal lengths like this telephoto 70-200 and instead picking your wider angle lenses. The reason being is that camera shake is a lot more noticeable when you're using a longer focal length. So go for a wider angle lens to minimize the obviousness of any camera shake. Tip number 2 is to shoot wide open, so you also want to pick the lens with the widest possible aperture. I'm going to shoot on my 24-70 at the 24mm end, and I'm going to shoot at my widest possible aperture, which for this lens is f2.8. The reason we want to do this is because we want to let in as much light as possible, so pick either aperture priority mode or manual mode so you can control your aperture. Tip number 3 is to hunt for the light. Just because you're photographing at night does not mean we want to be photographing in pitch black. Using different ambient lights, artificial lights, lights coming from windows, coming from the city, coming from cars, can all make really cool effects in your nighttime photography. I'm going to photograph this example nighttime portrait in my backyard. I want to make use of these festoon lights. But first I'm going to show you how it looks with just the festoon lights versus if I turn on my window light so I get a little bit of extra ambient fill light. So as you can see, adding the fill light from the window makes a huge difference. All of a sudden we can see the detail in her face. So make sure you take full advantage of any of the light that you have going on. Just because you have an interesting light that might be in the background doesn't mean you shouldn't take advantage of any inside lights or flashlights, torch lights, lamp lights, anything that you can have to just add a little bit of extra light into their face. Now let's get onto your settings. Tip number 4 is to slow your shutter speed. The reason we want to shoot at a slow shutter speed is because it's going to let more light into the camera, so we'll be able to photograph more detail. I want you to select, if you're shooting on manual mode, the slowest possible shutter speed that you can comfortably handhold without having too much motion blur. This will vary depending on how much your pet is moving and how shaky your hands are, but I'm going to select something around an 80th or 100th of a second. Tip number 5 is to push your camera's ISO. ISO measures the sensitivity to light, so the higher the ISO, the brighter the exposure. You will have a bit of noise or a lot of noise depending on the quality of your camera. I don't mind when I'm shooting at night the fact that I'm going to get noise. It just comes hand in hand with ISO, and pushing your camera to the upper limits of your ISO will give you a better exposure. So I'm going to push my camera to 6400. That's pretty high ISO. I can go higher, and I have in the past, so you just have to see what your camera is capable of and where you're happy to have the noise be. Tip number 6 is to watch for catch lights. Catch lights are the reflection of light sources in your eyes, so without them, photos can look really dark or lifeless. You always want to make sure you can see a catch light, or preferably 2 catch lights in both of your pet's eyes. If you're not seeing them in this nighttime photography, you're going to have to reposition yourself or your pet or the light source to make sure you can see a little bit of reflection in their eyes. And tip number 7 is to brace yourself. Because you're shooting at a slower shutter speed, any little bit of camera shake or movement in the camera is going to translate into motion blur. So we want to eliminate that as much as possible. Brace your camera by thanks Maple. Brace your camera by using your elbows, either on your knees or down on the ground. Be warned that when you get down on the ground, your dog's probably going to be very interested in you. Or you can even use a tripod or a gorilla pod if you're struggling. Tip number 8 is to change your white balance, which can drastically change the look of the colors in your photo. Rather than just using auto white balance, have a play around with the different white balance settings in your camera and see what different looks you can get. You can then further enhance these colors to make your photos either cooler or warmer by using editing software. Okay, those are my 8 tips. I'm now going to combine them all to take a photo of the dogs at night. there you have it. That's how you photograph your pet at night. I did warn you, it's a tricky technique, but it is really fun and rewarding to play around with. You can submit your own nighttime pet photos to the Ragamuffin Camera Club for your chance to win, and don't forget to download my nighttime pet photography cheat sheet. I'll put a link down below. Hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. Bye.